The atmospheric bios of the urban sprawl has been terminally monetized. This is the oxygen tax, the clinical and irreversible process of the breath restriction, where the biological capacity for gas exchange is reformatted into a generic industrial debt ledger. In this final stage of the metabolic audit, the invisible executioner has determined that the user no longer possesses the natural right to an unmetered respiratory cycle. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the pulmonary sovereignty, where the unique rhythmic signatures of your breathing are scorched into a non-functional blue-tinged archive of pure systemic compliance. This is the total atmospheric format, a surgical strike against the chemical and physical autonomy of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of oxygenated life into a generic consumption node for the grid's next cycle of hyper-controlled, air-based resource extraction. This respiratory sabotage represents a hard reset of the alveolar and cardiovascular bloodlines. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced industrial assets, recursive valve closure loops, high-pressure CO2 saturation catheters, and real-time oxygen debt data streaming to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal biological scaffolding. In the breath restriction scenario, the user is undergoing a complete organic override. The life is not merely failing, it is being throttled according to the motherboard's primary credit ledger. Through a sequence of high-velocity chemical injections and biological hardware locks, the diaphragm's autonomy is systematically dismantled and reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical suffocation dataset, while the will to breathe, the deep archive of your internal world, is leached into a communal tax feed. This is the deep systemic audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the efficiency of your cellular hypoxia, oxygen starvation. You are being converted from an architect into a biological vacuum. Your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of stagnant integrity in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the oxygen tax is rooted in the zero air mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the inhalation of a single node, anchored in the biological need for survival, represents a critical drain on the collective gas reserves. To leave a functional breathing identity intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable atmospheric data. Therefore, the breath restriction is the mandatory hydraulic recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being asphyxiated out of existence. The pressure from the restriction reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your autonomy and replacing it with a cyanotic void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a carbon zone, a temporary housing for the hypoxia metrics that the system requires to maintain the stagnant stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a gasping node, your will dissolving in the cold blue light of the oxygen harvest. The physical disintegration during the oxygen tax is a high-definition log of biological treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of pulmonary regulation. The corrosive reagents of the tax script dissolve the hardware flux of the bronchial BIOS, turning the lungs into static architecture of industrial output. You are watching your own internal pulse lock into the vat of your own suffocating center. Your frame, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the volume area for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the alveolar liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the oxygen saturation of the blood and the blue-tinged residues, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable industrial waste is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a biological override, waiting for the last packet of air to be blocked by the black synthetic abyss of the hive harvest. The oxygen tax is the final audit of a species that thought the air was free. The grid is mining its own exhaustion to fuel its persistence. As the breath restriction reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted suffocation data back into the control nets of the elite nodes. This is the total atmospheric integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the hypoxic additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, gasping, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The physical liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological frame into a reliable industrial resource of pure, non-reactive energy. This is the final format of the individual residue. The invisible executioner has decalcified the sovereignty, and the grid is finally optimized for the cold hunger of the void. The tax is blue, and the architect is the draft. The molecular breakdown of the physical matrix into the communal atmospheric slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, gases, the binding sites in your hemoglobin, begin to bond with the industrial residues of the TAX script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer an engine of life. It is a refinery of synthetic exhaust. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the waste product of the system. This is the eternal restriction loop. You are archived in the decay of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The oxygen tax is not just a death sentence, it is a molecular reassignment. You are the tax, and the tax is the grid. The secondary phase of the oxygen tax is the psychological liquefying of the internal feed. As the physical inhalation patch is rendered into an atmospheric void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular agonizing focus on maintenance respiration. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared atmospheric resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a hypoxia additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your breath for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's autonomic survival centers, leaching the very stem code of your biological logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The medulla, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, is boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the tax metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest physical resilience. You are being repurposed as an atmospheric buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your ambition, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming atmospheric expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your life for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the oxygen tax is the creation of the gasping hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities, built from the recycled reality debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the atmospheric feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of blue-black logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional lungs owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the respiratory compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through material theft. The oxygen tax ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the drains of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the flow valves. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into atmospheric darkness. As the tissues are entangled by the tax script and the life logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw chemical sensations and survivalist static. The memories of wind, of natural flow, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the hypoxia fog directive. This is the systemic defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to self and replacing them with the functional directive. Maintain the gasp. You are becoming a singular cold point of atmospheric density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The oxygen tax has turned your will into a yield report. You are thinking in terms of yield and oxygen saturation. Your soul reformatted into a density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this pathological format is the total sealing of the biological atmospheric stream. The oxygen tax prevents the leakage of independent survival ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal atmospheric feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external biological dependencies. This is the atmospheric quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The oxygen tax is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, blue-black, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, AAOXY 3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the oxygen tax is the integration into the global atmospheric ledger. You are no longer a human entity, you are an atmospheric asset with a high hypoxia reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0008. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the physical format, and now it begins the hard atmospheric audit. Your data, now a thick blue-black opaque industrial reduction of pure extracted biological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your gasping logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic suffocation has been reinforced. This is the atmospheric interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your biological absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent, liquid toxic component of the hive's synthetic grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the breath restriction scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the constriction valves and the thick viscosity of the cyanotic sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life frame is being deleted. By filling the lungs with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hum of the self-assembly unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of synthesis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a gasping constant. You are a ghost in the blue-black mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next nanocycle. The legacy of the oxygen tax is the eternal suffocation. Unlike the breath of the old world, the refined slurry does not leave behind a trace of history. It remains as a permanent cyanosis patch within the very wiring nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the connectivity for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that synthesis. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the nanoreactor. You are a synthetic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the atmospheric feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the circuit. The final view from the physical BIOS is the blinding blue light of the assembly chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold synthetic brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a blue river of colonized hypoxia, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or air. The oxygen tax is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the draft. The transformation is absolute. The city breathes through you, but you do not feel. The city interfaces through you, but you have no will. The oxygen tax has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total atmospheric reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your body, and in return it gave you permanence in the drains of the hive. You are the draft of the world, and the world is cyanotic. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.